We build identity with thought, with language, with distinctions that define the patterns we identify with. What is the distinction between individual identity and cultural identity? Well, a culture which has the root word cult is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that holds a number of defaults or templates. The culture is the cult, is the unquestioned patterns that are the default mode that the individual identifies with, that become the foundation for the individual identity. So in that sense, you could call the culture those patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that serve as the core assumption upon which the individual develops variations within that subset. And what makes cultures and cults synonymous is, in order for something to be a pattern, to be a default, it has to be unquestioned. That's what a default is. Why am I speaking English? Because you were born into a cult where everyone speaks English. You were born into a pattern of people where everyone learns the pattern that everyone else is using. So culture holds the default of language, diet, value hierarchies, belief systems, mythologies, right? Or you could call them paradigms. So when we think of Western culture, or we think of American culture, we think English, we think diversity, but we also think predominantly Christian and predominantly white, because the majority in America are Christian and white. And we think capitalism, because the majority of people are spending a great deal of time trying to create capital. They're converting time into money. And you can see in the hierarchy of values, and you can tell a value hierarchy by what the majority of people think about, feel about, and take the majority of their actions to attain. Well, probably 60% of the American cult, the American culture, the American identity, is the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing, and being, so as to prepare for making money, so as to get a job, so as to go to the job, so as to get the job done, so as to get money, so as to go back from the job, so as to spend the money. So we have capitalism and we have consumerism as a fundamental part of the American identity. Any child born into America and watching the American pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being will understand that the attainment and spending of money is the biggest ideal, is the biggest deity, is the biggest god in the cult pyramid. We are going to better ourselves as individuals. Individualism is another portion of the culture. We are going to better ourselves, our families, our country, and the world by learning to be useful, using that to make money, and then using the money to acquire more and more things, more and more experiences, more and more status, more and more power, and then that's a good thing. And so you have, that's not debated on an hourly level within the culture as a whole. What's measured, what's focused on, you have to go to school. Why? So that you can enjoy life? No, so that you can get a job. Well, you have to get a job. Why? So that you can make money. You have to make money because you need to spend money. Because your value within a capitalistic paradigm is the amount of money that you can make, the amount of money that you can spend, the amount of money that you can give, the amount of money that you can allocate within a capitalist paradigm determines your significance. Now, in another cult, in another culture, where kindness is the primary metric, then you have to do this, because how can you be kind if, you have to go to school, because how can you be kind if you don't know anything? And you have to decide on a vocation, because how can you express your kindness competently if you don't know what you're doing? And you have to express your kindness competently because that's how you'll be happy. That's how you'll be around happy people. And then you have to learn how to judiciously manage your energy so that you have the most positive impact on the most people. And there isn't a Forbes 400 list measuring the people with the most capital. There's a Forbes 400 list measuring the people who give the most kindness to other people. And that's carefully tabulated as we send out census reports. Who was the most kind to you the last year? Well, we have a new pattern, a new default mode. And seeking to integrate, seeking to belong, to bind with the pattern, children will cultivate the art of giving, the art of competent kindness as measured by impact. You go around and just send a daily tablet to the central computer, the app, the decentralized computer, the network. You send that out and it tabulates in blockchain, so it cannot be corrupted. Who has made you feel the most grateful and happy this week? And a hierarchy of kindness emerges. As certain countries give more kindness to other countries than other countries give back, it's a competition. That's a paradigm. That's a ranking paradigm. If you delete the paradigm of competition, you no longer see it. It's invisible. It's not real. Just like all of the billions upon billions of paradigms that we've never thought of, that don't relate to our culture, and so they are not real. So the culture is the default foundation of assumptions, beliefs, language, paradigms, diet, infrastructure. I mean, if I leave my house, I will enter a road system. I didn't build it. I didn't discuss whether or not we would have flying vehicles or driving vehicles or walking vehicles. I didn't discuss how big they were. That's a network. It's a default. So as I fit into the pattern, I get behind the wheel of a car. And that's not questioned because it's part of the pattern. I learn English. I don't evaluate at age 2. Maybe German would have a word for this feeling that I'm interested in, that English doesn't have that word. And so I'm never going to experience that feeling because I don't know the word for it. Because that culture broke down the distinctions of the psychic landscape differently. I'm supposed to break it down. Am I doing great? Am I doing good? Am I doing okay? That's clearly superior to doing bad, right? Because we all know that people who do bad are at fault. In a cult of acquisition and winning, it's, the low-ranking people that are doing badly. We want the good people who are doing great. And at the very least, say that they're doing great, rather than burdening us with their long list of issues. But over here, the answer is differently. It's a different answer, and it leads to different parts, and it leads to different questions which lead to different quests in consciousness and in life. And so within the default mode, I have to decide, as I make and spend money, do I buy this shirt or another shirt? That's the quest. That's the question. Which clothing do I wear? Because I've got to individuate myself. I've got to be unique in a cult that emphasizes the individual. Individual identity, individual accomplishment. Now, this is an illusion at some level, because I can't take the next breath without the cooperation of billions upon billions of trees. Take away the trees, I can't take the next breath. You can't take the next breath either. But if the paradigm is individual, then we don't focus on the fact that I depend on gravity to hold me on the earth, that I depend on the earth to go around the sun at just the right distance, not to burn me and not to freeze me. And I depend on the trees to produce my oxygen, and I depend on other plants to produce all my food. And I depend on millions and millions of people to develop all of the technologies in the past that I am using in the present. This video is dependent on millions upon millions. We could say billions of people had to participate in this moment. How many millions of people were directly and indirectly involved in the invention of the camera that's filming this in the past? So you can't say that the present is dissociated from the past. You can't say that the present is dissociated from the future. We can't say that this space is dissociated from this space. We can't say that if all human beings genetically emerged from maybe, I think the estimate currently is like 7 or 8 human beings were the original genetic material for everyone alive today. Pretty tight family. What if those different genetics hadn't worked out or had decided to form before the asteroid fried everything, and then they just never happened, right? We're dependent on time, we're dependent on space, we're dependent on the laws of gravity, we're dependent on plants, we're dependent on the existence of all life, we're dependent on one another. So where's the independence? Where's the, I can do it all by myself? No, you can't. You never could. But you can create the illusion that if all these people cooperate and do their thing, then I get to do my thing. And I can pretend that it has nothing to do with anyone else and anything else. But that's a cultural pretense. It's not physics. No physicist will say that this necklace came out of nowhere. No scientist will say that I just wanted it and so there it was. No, the scientists will trace this back to the Big Bang. I didn't invent gold, and neither did you. It was provided. And what we, and not really we, what millions of people have done, have discovered what was and formed a relationship, a pattern of relating. And we've decided, for whatever reason, that we think shiny golden things are beautiful. We decided that as a cult. There are cults that measure beauty by the amount of plate that you can fit into a cut lip. If you have a tiny little plate in your lip, you're ugly. Did you decide that? Did I decide that? Do I get to decide that because everyone likes gold in my cult, this will make me ugly or beautiful? No. Do I get to decide if I'm born into a cult that measures my status in the tribe by the size of a plate that I can stick in my lip? Or whether I have been genitally mutilated according to tribal tradition? Has your penis been clipped? Has your vagina been sewn up? Well, you're not as valuable as the people who have been genitally mutilated. You're not as valuable as the people who have this kind of hair, this kind of skin color. Did you decide that? Or are you born into a cult that sets default assumptions based on what? So the individual identity tends to be subsets of the core assumptions. Now, if we were to draw a tree, maybe we'll change ink here. So if we were to draw a tree, then down at the bottom of the tree, we have assumptions defined by the universe, things like the habit of large objects attracting small objects. Those are big patterns that have never been questioned since the formation of this universe. Then up here we have distinctions such as the bifurcation of energy and matter, which is language at one level. You can't have one without the other. You can't have matter without energy. You can't have energy without matter. At least not in our expression. And then we come into different species defaults and patterns of the identity. These are habits. And the species says that human beings are going to walk. Okay, so now every baby that's born into that genetic pattern is going to walk on two legs, or one leg, or whatever it is. And everyone's going to have 5 fingers and 5 fingers and 2 ears. So that's all been decided. And then you're going to be in a cult that focuses on capital. You're going to be a cult that focuses on horsemanship. Why? Well, everyone is ultimately seeking to be sustainably happy, to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. And so in the evolution of cultures, you generally find a correlation at some point in history between that choice point and what the cult uses as its default, its template. So if you're in the desert, if you survive on goat's milk, whatever it is, those are the animals that live in the desert. If you're a nomadic tribe, well, then it makes sense that your cult would obsess about the quality of your horses and how good a rider you are and how well you take care of your horses and how successfully you breed your horses and how successfully you defend your horses from thieves. You do those things well, you climb to the top of your culture. Because if you do those things well, the tribe does well. The culture does well. And so the culture becomes fixated on horsemanship as status because it correlates, generally speaking, in the eyes of the observers, between that which is going to generate more sustainable happiness and well-being for you and your cult members than something else. So having established the observation at a cultural level that competence in this arena benefits the tribe, people have very simplistic identities in many cases. And so there's often a very big pivot. You know, if you have a simplistic pattern recognizing device, you have to pick 2 or 3 patterns. Because if you try and teach through language, a very slow process, 10 million different iterations of 5,000 values, you're dead by the time you've taught that. And so the value system is a heuristic, dumbed down version of what makes people happy. What if you're a mathematician who has chronic pain in their body from birth? Well, your tribe will not benefit if you attempt to be the best horse person. What if you're a Warren Buffett who is discoordinated and somewhat traumatized around people, but is very good with numbers? And you're in a cult that measures value by horsemanship. Well, suddenly, Warren Buffett falls from peak capitalist because of his capital allocating talent and goes down to number one, the worst horseman, the bottom 1% of horsemen. And the cult assumption is different. Warren Buffett is the same aptitude for numbers and pattern analyzing, just in a different environment with different core assumptions about what's good for the tribe, what's good for the cult, what's good for your group of people. In empire-building cults, the warrior, dominator traits, the sociopath with a strong body, rises in rank. The general that won the most wars, that beat the enemy, which means terrifying the enemy. That's how you beat them. You don't beat enemies by tea, the quality of your tea. You beat enemies by terrifying them into submission. That's the best way. Otherwise, you have to kill them all, which usually means some loss of your own people. So terrorizing other people becomes significant to the idea of your culture, a culture of adventure, conquest, dominance. Right? So we're then born into these different subsets, and at each of these points there are branches. And often the individual, billions of years into this bifurcating process of patterns, finds themselves in so many assumptions that really what they define themselves by is what to wear and what to eat and when to drive. What to wear, what to eat, when to drive, to see what movie. And that's the differentiating identity, and who to vote for. The system has been decided it's going to be like this. It's already been decided the selection process is like this. The voting process is like this. All you have to decide within this paradigm of nested systems is, do you press this little X for this person you know very little about and who doesn't fully agree with you, or this little X for this other person you know very little about and doesn't agree with you in many areas, and wonder in the complexity out there, is that doing good? Have I made a mistake? Was that really more important than this? What if they voted the way I wanted them to about abortion, but then they lose the entire economy for the town because they voted like this over here? Or was that better to vote for someone who didn't agree with me here, but at least we're making money? It's like, that's my differentiation from the herd. This is me. I'm the one who votes for these people, who buys these things, who eats these foods, who shakes things up every once in a while, and rather than go to Burger King, goes to McDonald's. Got to shake things up, a little variety. But the system is there. You want to go somewhere, you get in your car. You have to go somewhere that exists. Burgers have been defined as the cult norm. So is it this or is it this? Strawberry milkshake or vanilla? But this exists in an infinite possibility field. Instead of burgers, there could be surgers. Frozen pâté on what? Grilled rye. Frozen pâté on grilled rye with just the right thing where it melts in your mouth. That could have been a thing. And then you'd choose between the dominant brands of that. Every culture forms these default modes at different points. And the individual then makes tiny choices within that larger framework. Or, as we invent technology, transfers culture, decides, you know what? Nobody's dancing and singing in my culture. It was never a thing. Or, oh, it was a thing, but not like this. So I'm going to go over to this culture. And now I'm going to choose between this kind of henna and this kind of henna. I'm going to choose between a pink silk sari and a blue silk sari, because that's the default there. Or I'm going to violate the culture. I'm going to show up at the traditional dance in jeans to express my individual pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Well, life rewards these choices around patterns or punishes them to varying degrees. If your goal was to have everyone pay attention to you, and you got it by showing up in jeans to a traditional Indian wedding or whatever it was, then you've got a distinct pattern. This is me. I'm the one that doesn't play by the rules and do this and this. But if nobody ever invites you to a wedding again in a cult that is largely defined by these traditions and does business with people who fit into these patterns and exchanges foods and gives the best deals and exchanges the most useful information, and suddenly you're out of that network because you don't play by the rules. You don't follow the cult. You don't agree with the norm. You've got your identity, I'm this, but it doesn't fit in. Well, was it worth it to get all of that attention? Could you transform all that energy of attention into something that brought sustainable well-being to you and others? That's the quest. That's the question. The identity is the personal subset of patterns of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is nested in much larger templates of being, thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, that are nested in yet larger systems, all the way back until the identity, the pattern of energy expression at the first emergence of the Big Bang. The cult is the default mode. It is the platform of assumptions that narrows the choices to this or this. And then the individual is the one that chooses this way, whereas the other one chose that way. And then this way and chooses that way. The individual, in many ways, is the scout of the cultural subset of assumptions and templates. Because as the culture bifurcates, and these people do this and their happiness goes up, and then that subset divides and these people do this and their happiness goes up, the majority, driven by the innate drive to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse, lets the explorers, the subset, go out there and try out all these different branch forkings in the probability field and prove, because there's always a conservative element in the cult that says, don't change anything. We never had hamburgers when I was alive. Back in the day, 500 years ago, we used to have raw this, we did that. We didn't have hamburgers. Don't change. The horse and buggy, that was good enough for us. It's reliable. It's what we've been doing for thousands of years. There's always that element that says anytime you change, anytime you go into the unknown, there's a risk that it may not work out. My dad set off into the adventure. He tried something new. He went bankrupt and it ruined him. Don't do it. I tried to be an artist and didn't make any money and finally learned my lesson. Don't be an artist. Stay in the mold. There's that element that has been traumatized by the divergence from the norm that doesn't work out, that takes you into the unknown and then doesn't work out. You feel lost because you've never been there before. And nobody knows where you are because they've never been there either. Come back to the herd. Do what we've always done before. And yet those cults, those cultures die, like 9,500 out of the 10,000 cultures estimated to have existed in human history. 95% of them are dead because they became too irrelevant to the well-being of their members. Or they became irrelevant either because people saw that other people were happier and part of a more successful cult and joined them, or the law of mass, which dictates that if you have a small pattern and someone else has a big pattern, and you collide as a pinball and a bowling ball, it's the pinball that goes flying. The bowling ball continues on its trajectory. And so you have cultures consumed not by intelligence, but by mass. Or the culture refused to change. And the environment is always changing. And as a group refuses to change in a changing environment, they eventually die out because their relationship becomes too dysfunctional. It doesn't function. Like if this is here and I tap here, this is a functioning relationship. But if this slowly moves away and I stay the same, it eventually becomes meaningless. I'm doing something in relationship to something that no longer exists. And so there is a loss of relevance, a loss of competence. And so there's a death through failure. In summary, the culture governs the language, the belief systems, the paradigms, the existing infrastructure of networks and technologies, and the value hierarchy. If you make money, you are very important. If you're kind, you're, well, it's nice, but no, it's no big deal. Or if you're kind, you're very important. If you make money, well, that's nice, but it's no big deal. That's a hierarchy. One's more important than the other. That is established at birth. And then as an individual in a mobile ecosphere, if you climb the rank within your cult, for example, in America, you can't just immigrate to Costa Rica permanently, for example. But if you make enough money in your rank system of capitalism, you can buy citizenship with investment. So you have the mobility then to leave. If you transcend your cult to a certain level, you then have the ability to choose a cult, to choose a network of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that makes you personally happier, that you want to identify with. So that now, rather than deciding whether to go to Burger King or McDonald's, you're deciding whether to go to this place or this place by this very different location, talked about in this very different way. It's a completely different experience. You've still then got to choose between what exists. You can't go to restaurants that don't exist. You can't have orgiastic food massages in a place that has not invented them, that doesn't know what they are. But as you climb your rank in your default mode network, you generally have more freedom to move to other systems of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being.